Alright, so I'm going to continue. I'm on page 218. There is a large index in the back of this book, so it's not 600 pages, it's more like 580, I believe. Okay, so next we have, in 863, Nicholas I, who from the boldness of his enterprises had acquired the appellation of the Great, then filled the papal throne. He wrote to Lothair, informing him that the Christian religion would neither permit him to repudiate his wife nor to marry his concubine. As a concubine, like she's a porcupine, concubine. And he threatened him with the thunders of the church if he did not quit Valdrade. The monarch, who had everything to fear from the united powers of his uncles, humbly answered that he was nothing, he had done nothing without the advice of the bishops, that even during his father's life he had married Valdrade, whom he had been compelled to leave in order to épouse Theuteberga, but that he left the matter entirely to the decision of the sovereign pontiff. The Pope, eager to profit by the weak condescension of the prince, sent two legates with orders to assemble a council at Metz, where the affair was examined according to the rules prescribed by the canons. But whether from fear, ignorance, or seduction, the Pope's envoys and the concert with the bishops of Lorraine condemned the marriage with Theuteberga and confirmed that with Valdrade. No. Nicholas, being informed of their provocation, convened an assembly of prelates himself, annulled the sentence pronounced at Metz, and deposed the two archbishops of Trèves and Cologne, and dispatched a legate to the court of Lorraine with letters replete with menaces, conveyed to a tone of arrogance very different to that style in which the popes had been accustomed to address the monarchs of France. The papal envoy, whose name was Arsène, proved himself worthy of his ambitious master. He had the insolence to tell the king that unless he took Theuteberga again, he should expel him from the bosom of the church. Though his threats had but little effect on the mind of Lothair, yet the peculiar situation of that monarch, surrounded by kinsmen who were ready to profit by any commotion that might take place in his kingdom, induced him to comply with the imperious mandate, and again to part from his beloved Valdrade. But the indignation of his subjects at the daring interposition of an insolent priest speedily enabled him once more to pursue the dictates of his inclination. Theuteberga was accordingly dismissed, and Valdrade recalled. This inflexible pontiff, enraged at this open contempt of his authority, excommunicated the two lovers. But his turbulent spirit was fortunately checked in its dangerous career by the hand of death. His successor, Adrian II, consented to annul the sentence of excommunication, on condition that Lothair, when he had repaired to Rome to ask him for absolution, should jointly with the noblemen of his retinue make oath that he had holden no commerce with Valdrade since the Pope's last prohibition. This was an infamous request on the part of the Pontiff, who should know that a compliance with it would involve Lothair and his followers in the guilt of perjury. The king, however, was weak enough to sacrifice his conscience to the love of tranquillity, and his nobles followed the example of their master. Lothair and all who swore dying within the year, the contemporary historians ascribe their death to the violation of their oath. So the historians are ascribing their death to the violation of their oath. A bit odd. All of this has gone wonky, but yes, we're having problems with love. Okay. So during these transactions, Solomon, king of Brittany, waited on Charles the Bold, whom he acknowledged for his lawful sovereign, and taking the oath of allegiance, engaged to pay him tribute, according to ancient custom. Charles profited by this interval of peace to have his wife, Ermentrude, there's been so much war, I can't even say the word peace, but it's in the book, I can't believe it, interval of peace, to have his wife, Ermentrude, crowned. The ceremony was performed in the church of Saint Médard at Soissons, where the king had assembled a council, and at the same time his eldest son, Louis, received consecration as king of Aquitaine, in the place of his brother Charles, who had recently died. This is 869. Now, during the tranquillity that now prevailed, some useful regulations of police were adopted. The Edict of Peace is the most curious record that remains at the ancient coins of France. It's, coin phrases. It could be ancient phrases, or I doubt they mean coins. It points out that the only places that enjoyed the privilege of coining, these were the palace, Quentevic upon Cange in Poitou, or Rouen, Rheims, Seine, Paris, Orléans, Chalon-upon-Saône, Mélé en Poitou, and Narbonne. On the 1st of July, all the counts or governors of those towns were ordered by the above edict to send their viscounts or deputies to Senlis, each accompanied by the masters of the mint, and some man of responsibility, to receive 5 livres from the treasury, in order to begin to coin good money. So he is talking about making coins. The smallness of this sum is apt at first to excite astonishment, but a few reflections will suffice to remove the cause of surprise. All payments were not made in money. In the early ages of the monarchy, the gold and silver received from the people was being refined, deposited in lumps in the royal treasury, from whence it was distributed by weight. This custom, which was taken from the Romans, was followed by the people even so late as the reign of Philip the Fair. Nothing is more common in the acts of those times than payments and fines made and levied by the pound or by the mark of gold and or silver. 1,000 examples of this may be found in the works of the learned Father Mabillon. Money then was only wanted for the more trifling articles of commerce, whence it was that so little was coined. Thus the 14th article of the Ordinance of Peace is by no means calculated to convey an unfavourable idea the power of Charles the Bold. It appears indeed from several records that there was nearly as much money in France then as now. The mistake arises from confounding the value of money at different periods. It is thought strange that the Council of Toulouse should fix the price of 3 bushels of wheat, as much barley, a measure of wine, and a lamb, the contribution paid by every curate to his bishop, at 2 sols, and that 24 pounds of bread, under the reign of Charlemagne, should be only worth 1 denier of silver. But the sol then was very different from what it is now, and the denier would be worth 30 French sols, according to the usual mode of computation, so that the pound of a bread would come to nearly a sou, a FOU, and we'll call it a fou and a quarter, a sou and a quarter. It's probably a sou because the other is a sol, a sou and a quarter, which is not much less than the usual price of that article in France in plentiful seasons. The most common gold coins under the first race of kings was the sou, the half sou, and the third of a sou of gold. This sou can equal to 40 deniers of silver, was composed of fine gold, and weighed about 85 grains and 1/3. It would now be worth about 15 French livres. It is pretended by some that the fou of silver was an imaginary coin, but others maintain the contrary. If there really was such a coin, it ought to have weighed, towards the end of the reign of Charlemagne, 345 grains, something more than a modern half-crown. Be that as it may, no traces of it are to be found in the cabinets of the curious, though they contain a great number of the silver deniers, and even of the obolum, marked with the heads of the kings who were descended from Pepin. These deniers under the Merovingian monarchs weighed about 21 grains, under the Carlovingians 28, and sometimes 32, and under the first monarchs of the Capetian race from 23 to 24. Their intrinsic value may be appreciated by that of the silver sou, of which they formed the 12th part. Besides these real coins, there was the livre, an imaginary one, invented for the purpose of facilitating calculation. Under the two first races it was worth a livre, or pound of 12 ounces, the only pound then in use for weighing gold and silver. Under Pepin, the livre, or pound weight of silver, was divided into 22 fous. Charlemagne, whose, 22 sous. Charlemagne, whose conquests had rendered this metal more plentiful, ordered that only 20 should be made out of a pound. That is to say, the silver sou was then precisely the 20th part of 12 ounces. Such is the true origin of the word livre, which is still made use of in France, though now only as the representative sign of 20 copper sols or halfpence. In order to give a just idea of the comparative value of money at different periods, it will be necessary just to notice the various changes that have taken place. The mark of silver of 8 ounces has long been worth 49 livres. The livre which in the time of Charlemagne was the representative sign of 12 ounces, would now be worth 73 livres, 10 sols. The sou, which was the 20th part of the livre, would be worth 3 livres, 13 sols, 6 deniers. The denier, which was the 12th part of the sol, would be worth 6 sols, 1 denier, and 1 obolum, and lastly the obolum, which was half a denier, would be worth 3 sols, 1 obolum, and 1 piet, or pite. Thus, supposing a town had borrowed 150 livres under the reign of that emperor, the loan would be equal to near 450 Louis the reign. Let's get this right. So now it was 150 livres under the reign of that emperor. The loan would be equal to near 460 louis of the present money. The monastery, which received from the treasury of that prince an annual pension of 400 livres, would now enjoy an income of 29,400 livres a year. From this calculation it appears that the English pound sterling, reckoning it at 22 French livres, is less removed from the ancient standard than any European coin whatever. On the death of Lothair in 869, had the decisions of the Assembly of Marsan, it's very good. Well, so all the denominations of money are in there somewhere, if you want to calculate it all out, had been respected. Okay, all his decisions were respected. His dominions would have been devolved to the Emperor Louis, but ambition is neither to be restrained by the force of law, nor the faith of treaties. The lawful heir being employed in guarding against a projected invasion of Italy by the Saracens. Charles the Bald and Louis the German divided his inheritance between them. To the latter was allotted Cologne, Trèves, Utrecht, Montbel, Strasbourg, Basel, Metz, Lisieux, La Chapelle, a variety of places of inferior note, and 2/3 of Frieseland, or Holland. Charles acquired Lyon, Besançon, Vienne, in Dauphiné, Tongres, Toul, Verdun, Cambrai, a portion of the Ardennes, and the remaining third of Holland, with several abbeys and monasteries. So there it is, the third in the middle on the map. He died, so off to the brothers they go, taking Lothaire's lands. In 870 and 875, we have both here, the death of the Emperor Louis II not only confirmed them in the accession to their new dominions, but induced Charles, under the sanction of the Pope, to attempt a farther extension of his power. With this view, he marched with a numerous and well-appointed army into Italy. His activity anticipated the designs of his brother Louis the German. He was received at Rome with the applause of the inhabitants, and the Roman pontiff placed the imperial crown on his head, saluted him Emperor of the Romans. It is worthy of the remark that, in bestowal of his dignity, the Pope, profiting by the present situation of affairs, acted as a sovereign, and Charles received it as a vassal. "We have judged him worthy of the imperial sceptre," said the Pope. "We have raised him to the imperial dignity and power, and we have honored him with the title of Auguste." From this period may be dated that authority in the election of emperors, which the Roman pontiffs afterwards claimed. Okay, so this is a big deal. Lothair died and all of this changeover. In 876, it was with indignation that Louis beheld himself the dupe of his brother. He resented in arms what he deemed a shameless breach of faith, entered Champagne and discharged his fury on the defenceless country. Though he retired on the approach of Charles, he only suspended his hostile measures. His preparations were continued with incessant diligence, and the new emperor had reason to rejoice at the death of the King of Germany, who united in his character the qualities of a statesman and a general, and who of all the descendants of Charlemagne most resembled him. His dominions were divided between his 3 sons. To Carloman he assigned Bavaria, Bohemia, Carinthia, Sclavonia, Austria, and part of Hungary. Louis had Franconia, Saxony, Holland, Thuringia, the Lower Lorraine, Cologne, and some other cities on the Rhine. To Charles, surnamed the Fat, was allotted all that country which extends from the Maine to the Alps. The news of his brother's decease no sooner reached the Emperor Charles than his restless ambition tempted him to despoil his nephew Louis. At the head of 50,000 men, he advanced to seize what he had ceded at the last division of the kingdom of Lorraine. At Megan, he was encountered by his nephew with inferior numbers, but superior courage and skill. The French army was broken by the charge of the German cavalry, and Charles himself, with difficulty, escaped from the dreadful carnage of his devoted subjects. He had scarcely united his scattered forces before he was confounded with the intelligence that the Normans had entered the Seine, laid waste the adjacent country, and possessed themselves on the city of Rouen. Okay, so we now have, here's the map, we have Lothair has died, the kingdom of Louis and Charles now has taken up. And yet, while this is going on, we have the attack of the Normans taking over the city of Rouen, which is up in the north. To complete the distress of Charles, he was summoned by the Roman pontiff to the protection of Italy. That country was still exposed to the desultory attacks of the infidels, whose continual descents were encouraged by the intrigues of the Duke Benevito and the Emperor of the Greeks, and the banners of Mahomet daily insulted the holy feet of the successors of St. Peter. Charles, after holding an assembly of the nobles at Chafly-upon-Oise for the regulation of his domestic affairs and security of his kingdom during his absence, determined to obey the citation of the Pope. He accordingly passed the Alps, and with a small train of followers, but he had scarce entered Pavia, to which city the Roman pontiff had advanced, in order to confer with him, when he was informed that Carloman, king of Bavaria, was already in Italy with a numerous army, and claimed by the will of his father the imperial title. The forces of Charles were still in France. The general to whose fidelity he had entrusted their revolution not to leave the kingdom. The indignant emperor, astonished and deserted, retired to France. At the same moment that his competitor, Carloman, alarmed at the rumour of his approach, had precipitately re-entered his German dominions. Oppressed with shame, anxiety, and fatigue, the emperor was seized on his retreat from Italy with a violent fever, and Seditius, his physician, by birth a Jew, betrayed the confidence of his master, administered as a febrifuge a dose of poison, of which he died in the cottage of a peasant at the small village of Brion, in the 38th year of his reign as King of France, and the 2nd as Emperor, and in the 54th of his age. Yeah. Okay, so now he had a Jewish, this is unusual, a Jewish physician all of a sudden. I didn't know that the Jewish now are physicians at this time. It's very interesting. Charles had 6 sons by his queen, Ermentrude, of whom only Louis, his successor, survived him, and 3 daughters. Judith, first married to 2 kings of England, and lastly to Baldwin, Count of Flanders, and Rothilda and Ermentrude, both abbesses, who first of Chelles and of Notre Dame at Soissons, the second of Asnon of the Scarpe, and by his second wife, Rachilde, he has 2 sons, Louis and Charles, who died in their infancy. Charles says Pasquier had few virtues and many defects. He was ambitious and enterprising, but weak, timid, and irresistible. Okay, so now this This is Pasquier speaking about Charles. Charles, says Pasquier, had virtues and many defects. He was ambitious and enterprising, but weak, timid, and irresolute, capable of conceiving great projects, but destitute of spirit and ability to put them into execution. From his reign may be dated the dangerous augmentation of ecclesiastical arrogance and the rapid decline of the Carlovingian race. So now Charles the Bold has died. Apparently was given poison on his deathbed. Maybe put him out of his misery faster. Louis II, surnamed the Stammerer. In 877, as soon as Louis was apprised of his father's death, he repaired to Compiègne, where he assembled the nobles and prelates of the realm in order to proceed to the ceremony of proclamation. Though his right to the throne was incontestable, he thought it necessary to secure the attachment of the nobles by lavishing the honours and estates of the crown. The Empress, in the meantime, having received from her husband the crown, the sceptre, and the royal mantle, hastened from Italy with the deed by which Louis was declared successor to the throne. She was accompanied by a number of nobles who were eager to partake of the bounty and munificence of their new sovereign. As the young prince did not dare reject their applications, he was proclaimed, consecrated, and crowned with the unanimous approbation of all parties. Every circumstance attending this accommodation tended to give birth to suspicions of a dark and sanguinary nature. The great men of the kingdom had refused to march to the assistance of their sovereign. At that very time the emperor was poisoned. And immediately after his death the empress returned to France, and those same noblemen, famous probably celebrities, but yes, the same noblemen who had conspired against the husband, flew to meet the wife, who obtained for them everything they required, but betrayed not the smallest desire to revenge the death of her lord. Nor was any inquiry set on foot into the crime of the regicide seditious. All this combination of circumstance bespeaks a dreadful mystery, and all proves that the vassals of Louis, too powerful to harbour the smallest apprehension, had left him but a shadow of authority. Bosson, brother of the Empress Rachilde, Duke or Viceroy of Italy, and Governor of Provence, was the most powerful nobleman of the realm. He had been entrusted with posts of great importance under the preceding reign. When Charles was crowned King of Lombardy, he was appointed governor of that kingdom, with the power of choosing all the counts. Abusing the authority he enjoyed, he had the presumption to carry off Ermengarde, the daughter of the Emperor Louis, and that proud princess, who was destined to wear a crown, did not disdain to marry him. An alliance thus splendid, strengthened by immense riches, inspired him with the most ambitious hopes. Besides these fortuitous advantages, he possessed a person the most engaging, and manners the most insinuating. Hence he became an object of universal esteem, and even the Pope, thinking he might be of service to him, appeared disposed to grant him the most distinguished honours. Thus favoured, courted, and caressed, his ambition daily increased, until at length it led him to aspire to the throne itself. In 878, Italy, during this time, remained without a sovereign. Pope John VIII, who had impatiently expected the aid of Charles to repress the insolence of the Saracens, endeavoured in vain to raise his son to the imperial dignity. His measures were successfully traversed by Lambert, Duke of Spoleto, and Adalbert, Marquis of Lomen of Bavaria, and the pontiff, incapable of resisting the arms of the Duke of Spoleto, abandoned Rome and embarked for France. The reception of John was such as he might naturally expect from a monarch whose cause he had espoused with ardour. In a council assembled at Troyes, the Roman pontiff presided, and the authority and influence of the Church were not neglected by its Holy Father. Among the various canons framed to support the episcopal dignity, it was ordained that all secular powers, under the penalty of excommunication, should observe the respect due to bishops, and all persons, however high their rank, were precluded from sitting down in their presence, without obtaining their permission. But although the Pope repeated, at the desire of Louis, the ceremony of his coronation, and placed with his own hands the crown on his head, yet his fervour soon cooled towards a prince whom he discovered to be destitute of power and capacity, and his interest induced him to seek a more effectual support in the friendship of the factious and independent nobles of his court. The thunders of the Vatican, which he brandished against the rebellious peers of France, were rather intended to deceive the sovereign than dismay the conspirators, and John, after having in vain exhorted the nation to respect the distress of Rome, and to unsheath the sword against the presumptuous Saracens, proceeded on his return to Italy. During the Pope's stay in France, the marriage of Carloman, the son of Louis, and his first wife, Ausgard, daughter of Count Hardouin, with a daughter of Bausson, was celebrated at Troyes with great magnificence. After the council was dissolved, Louis repaired to Compiègne to receive the report of the ambassadors whom he had sent into Germany to negotiate a peace. The answer they brought was favourable to his wishes, and the two monarchs meeting at Mersin, a treaty was concluded, which they signed at Sauron, a royal mansion situated between Maastricht and Aix-la-Chapelle, with regard to the kingdom of Lorraine. It was agreed that the partition with which they had made between Charles the Bold and Louis the German should be strictly adhered to. In Provence, each party was to keep possession of what he then enjoyed, and it was determined that in Italy matters should remain as they were, till the month of February following, when a council should be convened, which at the 4 sovereigns of the house of Charlemagne were to be invited to attend. But the revolt of Bernard, Marquis of Septimania, attracted the attention of Louis to a different quarter. in 879 AD, that nobleman, notwithstanding the anathema that had been pronounced against him at the Council of Troy, notwithstanding the sentence by which Louis had deprived him of his governors and estates, still kept an army on foot, and set the power of the king at defiance. As Louis advanced at the head of his troops to chastise the insolence and audacity of this rebellious subject, he was seized at Troy with a disorder that speedily proclaimed his approaching dissolution. He sent his eldest son, Louis, into Burgundy, under the conduct of Duke Bosson, and of Bernard, Count of Auvergne, the abbot Hugh Thierry, his grand chamberlain, and some other noblemen. Then ordering his attendants to convey him to Campagne, to Campania, is really a place, he there died, not without suspicions of being poisoned, on Good Friday. The 10th of April, in the 2nd year of his reign and the 31st of his age, he was interred in the Abbey of Saint-Cornille. Louis had by Ansegard 2 sons, Louis and Carloman, and he left his second wife, Adelaide, pregnant of a son, who was soon after baptized by the name of Charles, and is distinguished by the opprobrious epithet of Simple. Charles the Simple was born. 879, Louis III and Carloman. The king on his deathbed had commissioned Odo, Bishop of Beauvais, and Count Albrun to carry the crown and sceptre, with the other emblems of royalty, to his eldest son Louis, whose coronation he ordered them to forward with the utmost expedition. To the accomplishment of these orders no possible opposition could have occurred, had not the kingdom been divided by 2 powerful factions, one of which was headed by Duke Bosson, Hugh the abbot, Thierry the grand chamberlain, and Bernard, Count of Auvergne. The leaders of the other were Gausilin, abbot of Saint-Denis, and Conrad, Count of Paris. These last, having met at Kriel, invited Louis of Germany into the kingdom, who accordingly advanced as far as Metz, where he experienced the most flattering reception. Their apology for thus inviting an usurper to fill the throne of their lawful sovereign was founded on the incapacity of inexperience of the children of Louis, the defect in their birth being sprung from a repudiated wife, and lastly on the known prudence, valour, and moderation of the German prince. Such was their pretext, but the real motives of their treacherous conduct were interest and a desire of revenge. Bosson, however, and the other nobles of his party, being determined to fulfill the last injunctions of the deceased monarch, repaired to Meaux, in order to deliberate on the dangers which threatened the state. The news of the invasion by Louis filled them with alarm, and having no army to impede his progress, they resolved to purchase his forbearance by ceding to him that part of the kingdom of Lorraine which had been allotted to Charles the Bold. This proposal was accepted, and the king immediately returned to Germany, where his presence was required. Carloman, king of Bavaria, had been attacked by a stroke of the palsy. Arnul, his son, by a concubine, profited by his father's illness, to seize a part of his dominions. But the presence of Louis compelled him to resign his conquests and to content himself with the acquisition of a few bishoprics and abbeys. The kingdom was confirmed by the dying parent to the monarch who had rescued it from the hands of his rebellious son. Gausilon and Conrad, in the meantime, not daring to remain in France, repaired to the court of Germany and complained to the queen of her husband's neglect in refusing to profit by so glorious an opportunity of increasing his power and extending his dominions. The ambitious princess, whose name was Luitgard, entered into their schemes and had sufficient influence over the mind of her husband to persuade him to a violation of the late treaty. He had made every necessary preparation for a second invasion of France, when he was informed that a new enemy had appeared in Lorraine and committed great devastations. This was Hugh, the hapless progeny of Lothair, and his beloved Waldrade. As he had reduced several towns, the retaking of which would necessarily require much time, Louis was prevented from entering Neustria, but still he sent Gausilin and Conrad thither with a body of troops and promised to follow them as soon as possible. The report of this second eruption spread a general alarm throughout the kingdom. The nobles, who had preserved their fidelity to the family of the deceased monarchy, saw no other remedy for the calamities which threatened them than the speedy coronation of the young princes. The king, on his deathbed, had appointed his eldest son Louis his sole successor, but the dread of displeasing Bosson by the exclusion of his son-in-law Carloman induced them to adopt the resolution of placing them both on the throne, and of dividing the kingdom between them, according to the ancient custom of the realm. It was this division, so difficult to make, that had urged them to delay their inauguration so long, and even now they were under the necessity of deferring it to a future time. The princes, therefore, were sent to the abbey of Cerise, where they, Ferrier, could be that also, where they were anointed and crowned by Assegis, Archbishop of Sens. At this time they had attained their 15th or 16th year. The courts of their respective dominions were not fixed till the following year. Aquitaine and Burgundy were allotted to Carloman, and France and Neustria to Louis. An attempt was made by a few of the nobility to assert the rights of Charles the Simple, but his mother Adelaide had not sufficient influence to support his claims. Such was the state of affairs in France when Bosson, taking advantage of the minority of the young princes, at length revealed his perfidious designs. Promises, presents, entreaties, and threats were so opportunely and successfully exerted that by the Sacred Council of Mantes, in the district of Vienne, assembled in the name of our Lord and by inspiration of his divine majesty, he was elected and crowned Prince of, after all that, King of Provence. Alright, so now we have the dual king system here. They're having to split an area. And now next off. This election was made and confirmed by the archbishops of Vienne, Lyon, Tarenne, Taff, Arles, Besançon, and by the bishops of Valence, Grenoble, Vaison, Die, Marianne, Gap, Toulon, Chalon-upon-Saône, Lausanne, Agde, Maison, Viviers, Marseille, Orange, Avignon, Uzès, and Reims. So quite a big area, by which the extent of the new monarchy may be known. It is sometimes denominated in history the Kingdom of Arles, from the name of its capital. Okay, and at others the Kingdom of Provence, as it is called when possessed by one of the sons of the Emperor Lothair. Thus the sons of Louis beheld themselves with indignation despoiled of their fairest part of their inheritance by the sword of a powerful neighbour and the intrigues of a faithless kinsman. In 880 AD, their throne indeed was shaken on every side, and its very foundation might possibly have been subverted, had it not been supported by the fidelity and abilities of Hugh the Abbot. Louis of Germany, urged on by his wife, prepared to fulfill his promise to the Abbot of Saint-Denis and the Count of Paris. But the malcontents were overawed by the prudent dispositions of Hugh, and the Germans in vain penetrated into the heart of France, and the hopes of Louis were chilled by the languid operations of his partisans. He consented to an interview with his youthful rivals at Orbe, near the Lake of Geneva, and a subsequent congress at Gondreville on the Meuse, at which all the descendants of Charlemagne were present, ratified the succession of Louis and Carloman, and confirmed the possession of Lorraine to the King of Germany. The royal brothers, delivered from the terror of foreign invasion, prepared to chastise the insolence of domestic rebellion. Strengthened by their new alliances, they marched with a numerous army through Burgundy and entered the revolted territories of their presumptuous vassal. The Confederate forces, assisted by those of Charles, King of Italy, formed the siege of Vienne, defended with masculine valour by Hermengarde, the consort of Basson. All right, but the princes were soon compelled to separate, while the continuance of the siege devolved on Carloman. Charles returned to Rome to receive the imperial crown, and Louis, with a considerable detachment, directed his march against the Normans. Okay, so now we have Louis heading over to the Normans, and Charles off to Rome to get the imperial crown. In 881, these hardy adventurers, disdaining the severity of winter, had in the month of December taken Ghent, which is in Belgium, I believe, where they established their headquarters. Surprised the city of Tournai, made themselves masters of Courtrai, which they fortified, and stormed Saint-Omer, which they reduced to ashes. From thence they spread their devastations along the banks of Schelde and the Somme. Cambrai, Saint-Réquier, Sainte-Valerie, Amiens, Corbie, and Arras were taken and pillaged, and most of the inhabitants put to the sword. At Saucourt, in Ponthieu, the rovers of the north were encountered by the maiden Valour of Louis, after a desperate engagement of victory declared for the French. 9,000 Normans, with their leader Garomond, were left on the field, and the remainder repassed the Somme and sought their safety in flight. The victory of Saucourt had displayed the courage and the death of Louis of Germany, proclaimed the moderation of the youthful King of France. He rejected with firmness the crown proffered by the inhabitants of Lorraine, and yielded to the superior pretensions of the Emperor Charles the Fat. So at some point here we have the death of Louis of Germany. 882. But the promising virtues of this youthful monarch were cut off by a premature death, as he was hastening to assist the Duke of Brittany in the expulsion of the Normans from the banks of the Loire. He was seized at Tours with a fatal disease that compelled him to return to Neustria. Being conveyed to Saint-Denis in a litter, he there expired, on the 22nd year of his age and the 3rd of his reign. The loss of this prince was deeply deplored by his subjects, who admired his virtue, his valour, and his moderation. So that could be Louis the Third. Oh, I don't know. That could be Louis the Third. I'm not sure which one died there. Sorry. We're at 57. I'll take a break now. I'll try to find out who died at that point. But yeah, we're going on to page 231 in the AD of 882.